He was in our family, he was loved, and we still love him today.
There are still suspects to this day that we're still evaluating and looking into. The motive in that case may have been robbery, possibly, but again, we're still looking into that matter as well.
Say Heron's case is, quote, baffling, and say he was stabbed an innumerable amount of times and bled to death.
Forensics have gotten much better than in 85, so we submitted things that were tested back then. We're making better results now, with technology being enhanced like it has been.
No mother should have to bury their child, and no mother should have to deal with everything that happened.
70 stab wounds. That's what it takes to silence a man's story, or at least that's what someone thought on a January night in 1985. But in the quiet community of Shady Acres Trailer Park, where Billy's brutal murder shattered more than just the winter silence, some stories refuse to stay buried. Imagine a place where neighbors don't just live next to each other, they live in each other's lives. Where a disabled Navy veteran like Billy could carve out a piece of peace after serving his country. Where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. Until that morning when someone found Billy's trailer too quiet, knocked on his door, and walked into a nightmare that would haunt Maryville, Tennessee for nearly 4 decades. The crime scene told a story of rage, 70 stab wounds, walls painted with violence, and questions that would echo through generations. Who could harbor such hatred for a man known for his kindness? What darkness lurked beneath the surface of this close-knit community? And how could someone commit such a brutal crime and vanish into thin air, leaving behind only whispers and suspicions? Tonight, we're unraveling more than just a murder mystery. We're diving into the story of a veteran, the 11th of 15 children, a man who served his country until injury sent him home, a neighbor who turned a modest trailer into a beacon of warmth in his community. But before we dive deeper into the mystery, I'd like to ask for a small favor. The statistics show that more than 70% of you watching aren't subscribed to the channel yet. If you're enjoying these deep dives into true crime and want to stay updated on future cases, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow and ensures you don't miss out on any new videos. Now, without further ado, let's get back to the case. March 28, 1956. In Blount County, Tennessee, the Heron family welcomed their 11th child into a home already bursting with life. Billy Wayne Heron entered a world where hand-me-downs were a way of life, where 15 children learned to share not just clothes and toys, but dreams and determination. Being number 11 out of 15 wasn't just a number to Billy. It was an education in survival, in finding your place in a crowd, in making do with less but somehow ending up with more. The Heron household might not have had much in terms of material wealth, but they were rich in the things that mattered: love, loyalty, and an unshakable belief that family comes first. But Billy had dreams that reached beyond the rolling hills of Blount County. As he watched his older siblings forge their paths, something called to him, a desire to serve, to see what lay beyond the horizon. The Navy beckoned with promises of adventure and purpose, and young Billy answered that call with all the eagerness of someone ready to write his own story. For a while, it seemed like the Navy would be Billy's ticket to everything he'd dreamed of. The structure, the discipline, the brotherhood, it fit him like a glove. Here was a place where the lessons learned at that crowded dinner table served him well, where being part of something bigger than yourself wasn't just a saying, it was a way of life. Then came the injury, the kind that doesn't just heal with time and bandages, the kind that sends you home with a disability discharge and forces you to rewrite all your carefully laid plans. For some, this would have been the end of the story. For Billy, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. Back in Maryville, he found his place in Shady Acres Trailer Park. Now, trailer parks often get a bad rap, but Billy saw something different there, a chance to create the same sense of community he'd known growing up. His trailer became more than just 4 walls and a roof. It became a haven where neighbors knew they could find a friendly face, a helping hand, a moment of peace. In a world that often seems to reward the loudest voice in the room, Billy was proof that sometimes the quietest acts of kindness speak the loudest. He took what life handed him, the good and the bad, and wove it into something worth sharing with others. Nobody could have known that this life, built on the foundations of family love and community spirit, was racing toward a violent end. That the warmth Billy brought to his corner of Shady Acres would be extinguished in one brutal night that would haunt his community for decades to come. January 4th, 1985. Winter had settled over Shady Acres Trailer Park, bringing with it the kind of quiet that makes small towns feel even smaller, the kind of quiet that can hide the approach of violence. For Billy, it started as just another Friday evening. 9:30 p.m., that's when neighbors last saw him alive. Just another moment in just another day, the kind that usually blends into all the others. Except this one wouldn't. This one would stand frozen in time, marked by what came next. Morning arrived on January 5th with an absence. In a close-knit community like Shady Acres, silence can speak volumes. Billy's trailer sat unusually still. No lights, no movement. None of the usual signs of life that neighbors had come to expect. No friendly wave, no morning greeting. Just silence. That silence bothered one of his neighbors enough to check. Sometimes the worst discoveries come from the kindest intentions. When knocks went unanswered, concern turned to worry. When they finally entered Billy's trailer, worry transformed into horror. The scene inside defied comprehension. 70 stab wounds. Let that number sink in. 70 separate decisions to keep inflicting pain. The walls, the floors, the furniture, all painted with the violence of Billy's final moments. His body lay in the bedroom, but the story of his last fight was written all over that trailer. The head trauma spoke of rage unleashed with a blunt object. This wasn't just murder. This was fury given physical form. For the neighbor who found him, it was a moment that would play on repeat in their nightmares. For the tight-knit community of Shady Acres, it was the day their illusion of safety shattered like a mirror, leaving them to pick up the pieces of their broken sense of security. News travels fast in small towns, but bad news travels faster. As word spread through Shady Acres, doors that usually stood open began to close. Parents called their children inside. Neighbors who normally chatted over fence lines now hurried past with quickened steps and worried glances. In the raw aftermath of discovery, as police cars and crime scene tape transformed their quiet community into something out of a nightmare, residents of Shady Acres grappled with a terrible new reality. The man who had brought so much warmth to their community had died in an explosion of violence that seemed impossible to reconcile with the Billy they knew. The Maryville Police Department had seen their share of crimes, but Billy's murder was different. When detectives stepped into that trailer, even veterans of the force felt their stomachs turn. This wasn't just a murder scene. It was a testament to unbridled rage, a puzzle written in blood spatter and violence. In 1985, crime scene investigation was more art than science. No DNA databases, no advanced blood pattern analysis, no genetic profiles to run through computers. Just meticulous collection of evidence, careful photography, and the hope that something, anything, would point them toward the killer. They gathered what they could. Blood samples, carefully preserved. Trace evidence bagged and tagged. Each piece might hold the key, but in 1985, some of those keys wouldn't fit any locks for decades to come. Technology hadn't caught up with their needs, leaving detectives to rely on old-school police work. Knock on doors, take statements, follow hunches. The interviews began immediately. In a trailer park, walls are thin and people notice things. Neighbors talked about Billy's routines, his visitors, any strange cars or unfamiliar faces they might have seen. And a name kept coming up, Roger Dale Udy, a local man with a record, someone known to have crossed paths with Billy. But in 1985, knowing something and proving it were worlds apart. Rumors spread through Maryville like smoke, each one offering a different version of that night's events. But rumors don't stand up in court, and physical evidence could only tell them so much with the technology they had. The case began to cool, not for lack of effort, but for lack of proof. Weeks turned into months. Months stretched into years. The case file grew thick with reports, interviews, and dead ends. Billy's family watched as their hope for justice seemed to slip further away with each passing day. His sister Joyce Tipton refused to let his memory fade into just another statistic. She spoke of Billy as somebody, not just a victim, but a brother, a son, a friend who deserved more than an unsolved case number. For nearly 40 years, that case file sat waiting. Evidence boxes gathered dust in storage, their contents holding secrets they couldn't yet tell. Billy's family kept his memory alive, sharing stories of his kindness, his laugh, the way he'd light up a room. They refused to let him become just another cold case, just another unsolved mystery. Sometimes justice doesn't run on our schedule. Sometimes it waits for science to catch up, for new eyes to look at old evidence, for persistence to pay off. In 2023, Detective Arthur King pulled that file off the shelf. Modern forensic science had come a long way since 1985, and those carefully preserved samples from Billy's trailer might finally have something to say. The FBI got involved, bringing their cutting-edge DNA analysis to bear on evidence that had waited patiently for decades. And suddenly those blood samples weren't just evidence of violence anymore. They were silent witnesses finally ready to speak. 2023, the year science finally caught up with secrets that had been written in blood nearly 4 decades earlier. When Detective Arthur King sent those old evidence samples to the FBI, he wasn't just following procedure, he was opening a door that had been locked since 1985.
Forensics have gotten much better than in 85, so we submitted things that were tested back then. We're making better results now, with technology being enhanced like it has been.
And behind that door, Roger Dale Udy, the same man whose name had whispered through the investigation all those years ago, the same man who, it turned out, had been sitting in prison all this time, serving a life sentence for another murder committed in 1987, a murder that might never have happened if the truth about Billy's death had come to light sooner. The DNA didn't lie, it couldn't. Those samples that had waited so patiently in evidence storage finally had their say, drawing a direct line between the violence in Billy's trailer and the man who'd been an early person of interest. Science had finally provided what witness statements and rumors couldn't: proof. November 6th, 2024. The day headlines announced what Billy's family had waited nearly 40 years to hear. Roger Dale Udy, now 62, was indicted by a Blount County grand jury for Billy's murder. The man was already behind bars, but this wasn't just about adding another conviction. This was about acknowledgement, about truth, about a family finally being able to put a name to the shadow that had haunted them for decades. For Billy's family, the news landed like a thunderclap, shocking, powerful, and shaking loose emotions long buried under years of waiting. The media coverage that followed did more than just report facts. A 2023 story about Billy's unsolved murder had already stirred the pot, reminding the community that some wounds don't heal until truth cleanses them. It brought people forward, shook loose memories, reminded everyone that in small towns, justice isn't just about law enforcement, it's about community. Now, as legal proceedings move forward, the case that started in the winter of 1985 is writing its final chapter. The evidence is strong, the science solid. But for those who loved Billy, for the community that lost him, this isn't just about a conviction. It's about remembering who Billy Wayne Heron really was. He was the 11th of 15 children who learned early that love multiplies when you share it. A Navy veteran who served his country until his body couldn't anymore. A neighbor who turned a simple trailer into a lighthouse of kindness in his community. His story wasn't just about how he died, it was about how he lived. The case of Billy Wayne Heron teaches us something crucial about justice. It might move slowly, might take decades to arrive, but it never stops moving. Sometimes it just needs a helping hand. From advancing technology, from dedicated detectives, from communities that refuse to forget, from families that refuse to give up hope. For 40 years, the murder of Billy Wayne Heron stood as a dark chapter in Maryville's history. But sometimes the darkest stories carry the brightest lessons. This case reminds us that evidence doesn't expire, it just waits for science to catch up. That determination, whether it comes from a grieving family or a dedicated detective, can bridge decades. That justice might move at its own pace, but it never stops moving entirely. Think about that trailer park in 1985, where neighbors kept their doors locked and their children close, wondering if a killer walked among them. Now think about that same community in 2024, finally able to put a name and face to the shadow that had haunted them for so long. Roger Dale Udy hadn't just taken Billy's life. He'd stolen a community's sense of security. His arrest didn't just close a case, it closed a wound that had festered for nearly 40 years. For Billy's family, especially his sister Joyce Tipton, this resolution brings a complex mix of emotions. Relief tangles with renewed grief. Old wounds reopen even as they finally begin to truly heal. 40 years is a long time to wait for answers, a long time to keep someone's memory alive, a long time to hope that someday, somehow, justice would find its way home.
Wavered through the years because it had been so long, but there is always that possibility.
She would be the most relieved, and she probably deserves the most relief, because no mother should have to bury their child, and no mother should have to deal with everything that happened.
But here's what we need to ask ourselves. How many other families are out there, waiting for their own answers? How many evidence boxes sit in storage rooms across the country, holding secrets that science just isn't quite ready to reveal? And what responsibility do we have to these families, these communities, these victims who can no longer speak for themselves? Every cold case is more than just a file gathering dust. It's a family waiting for answers. It's a community carrying unresolved trauma. It's a story waiting to be finished. Billy Wayne Heron's case proves that with persistence, with advancing technology, with dedicated investigators, even the coldest cases can be solved. What do you think? Should we be investing more in cold case units, in advancing forensic technology, in keeping these stories alive until science can catch up with justice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If Billy's story moved you, and I know it has, take a moment to share it. Every share could help another family waiting for answers, another community healing from unsolved trauma, another detective looking for that one breakthrough that could crack a case wide open. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon to stay updated on more stories of justice delayed but not denied. And check out our other videos appearing on your screen now. Each one tells another story of persistence, determination, and the long arc of justice finally finding its target. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time, tragedy, and finally truth. Until next time, keep searching for answers, keep asking questions, and never stop believing that justice, though sometimes slow, is always worth the wait.